This day in sports history. It's April 2nd, and on this day in 1998, UNLV's Jerry Tarkanian won. But it wasn't on the basketball court. Jerry Tarkanian always seemed to have a target on his back that the NCAA kept firing at. The origin of that focus can be traced back to a column he wrote for a Long Beach, California paper in 1973, when he was the head basketball coach at Long Beach State. In it, he called out the NCAA for going after smaller fish and letting the big fish swim on past.
There's one rule that's called the extra benefit rule. That rule can be interpreted in any way the NCAA wants, and that's what bothers me. UCLA has given cards to players, and the LA Times has reported it. The NCAA barely does anything to them. If we were to buy a kid a milkshake, they'd come in.
This was an era, and this era lasted up until about a few years ago, when the NCAA carried supreme power to drop the hammer on a college athletics program. The column that Tarkanian wrote in '73 drew the spotlight to his program, and shortly after he departed Long Beach State for UNLV, the NCAA Compliance Office was handing out violations against Long Beach's basketball program. An investigation into Tark and his Runnin' Rebels program started soon after he got there.
The NCAA, if you look back, every coach that's ever fought him has got buried within probably months. They're usually fired.
By 1977, the athletics program at UNLV was found to have committed 38 infractions, most prior to Tarkanian even arriving on campus, and then the NCAA imposed a 2-year sanction on the UNLV basketball program, prohibiting any television or postseason appearances. They also strongly recommended that Tark sit out those 2 years. The administration at UNLV didn't think it had much of a choice, so they agreed to the terms. But Tarkanian fought back, first suing the university and getting a restraining order prohibiting UNLV from imposing the sanction on him. And then he later added the NCAA to that lawsuit, claiming his right to due process had been violated. That turned into a long legal battle that lasted more than a decade, and it made its way all the way to the Supreme Court, who ruled against Tarkanian in 1988. But during that time, Tarkanian had turned the basketball program at UNLV, a university known as Tumbleweed Tech before he got there, into a national powerhouse with a couple of Final Four appearances. After the SCOTUS ruling, the NCAA dialed up the pressure. When the Rebels were rolling to their first national title, which by an interesting happenstance also happened on this day in 1990, the NCAA compliance and enforcement folks visited the Vegas campus 11 times during the year. A total of 10 of Tark's players were suspended for different infractions. One of those targeted was Greg Anthony, whose infraction seems laughable with today's NIL market, but Anthony had started a campus business with a couple of buddies selling T-shirts. The NCAA threatened his eligibility. The continued focus and enforcement on UNLV's basketball program promulgated the idea of its players being thugs and cheats. Now, here's the thing. This is not to say that Jerry Tarkanian ran a squeaky clean program. He didn't. But neither did a lot of other programs that so many believed to be clean. The point is, the spotlight on the UNLV program was hyper-focused because of Tarkanian's continued calling out of NCAA hypocrisy. Now, there were issues that arose. In 1989, there was Richard the Fixer Perry's involvement with several UNLV players. A picture surfaced of Perry, a prominent Vegas gambler who was convicted a couple of times on sports bribery charges, in his hot tub with UNLV players Anderson Hunt, David Butler, and Moses Scurry. It was guilt by association. Then, one of Tark's recruits, Lloyd Sweet Pea Daniels, was caught in an undercover sting buying crack. And it was those two things that brought even more scrutiny and eventually led to the end of Tarkanian's tenure at UNLV. In 1991, the NCAA placed the basketball program on probation again, and again prohibiting them from appearing on television or playing in the postseason. Shortly after that, Tarkanian was forced to resign. So, now about ready to close the loop here and get back to the relevance of today, but in 1992, after he was forced out, Jerry sued the NCAA for the decades of harassment and conspiracy against him and his programs at Long Beach State and UNLV. The suit dragged on for 6 years until on this day in 1998, the NCAA settled the case with Jerry Tarkanian, paying him $2.5 million and issuing a conciliatory statement. Tarkanian had been vindicated. Finally, he could breathe a sigh of relief, saying, "I just hope people will now realize that the accusations against me, 25 years worth of them, were unfounded and without evidence." All right, so the NCAA actually did some positive things during this time. On this day and back-to-back years, the NCAA made 2 key rules changes to college basketball that made the game more watchable and entertaining. In '85, the NCAA announced the institution of the shot clock. In the past few weeks, I've talked about some of the stall tactics in games that turned into snooze fests because of the lack of an incentive to actually take a shot. Well, teams were holding the ball 3-4 minutes of possession. Just yesterday, we talked about how Villanova's Rolly Massimino used the tactic to great success to win the national title in '85. Now, that had to figure a little bit in their decision, but of course, North Carolina's Dean Smith utilized the four corners offense. There's a well-known 1968 ACC tournament game between NC State and Duke when Norm Sloan's Wolfpack held the ball for most of the game with a final score of 12-10. It may have taken the NCAA a while to get to this decision, but now wanting a quicker pace to the game, they announced that a 45-second shot clock was the new law of the land. That has been adjusted over the years, including what it resets to on missed shots rebounded by the shooting team, but now it's a 30-second shot clock. And then on this day in 1986, the NCAA adopted the three-point shot. Now, this was not an easy one to implement. A lot of coaches did not want it, and this was also not a quick decision. The NCAA actually experimented with the three-pointer over the course of 5 years in about 20 different conferences around the country. There were different distances depending on which league it was, and when it came time to announce the decision, the three-point distance was set at 19 feet 9 inches. That distance was adjusted in 2008 to 20 feet 9 inches, and now it's 22 feet and 3/4 inches. So with the implementation of the three-point shot, it took a little focus away from the big man, expanded play away from the basket, brought the role of the little guy who could shoot bombs into play. But obviously there were going to be people who did not like it. I mentioned not too many days ago that Indiana's Bobby Knight didn't like it when they adopted it, didn't like it through the remainder of his coaching days, and hated it just as much when he retired. There was Dayton's head coach Don Donaher, who felt the adoption of the three-point shot was symptomatic of America's sinking into a moral morass, saying, "To me, it's just like a game show." Hey, real quick, you've heard me talk a lot about the Sterling Soap Company over the past few months, and if you haven't tried out their soaps, I get it. It's not easy changing up your routine. But let me just say, if you give them a try, I'm nearly 100% certain you will have zero regrets. They carry not only bar soap, but shave soap, liquid body soap, body lotions, beard balm, lip balm, and a lot more. Plus, there are myriad scents to choose from. Their products are made with natural ingredients and scented oils, and they are committed to being environmentally conscious. And I always get a handwritten note on my packing slip, so I know it's been checked before shipping, and it's a nice little human touch in a world that seems to be going away from that. Give Sterling Soap a try today at sterlingsoap.com. On this day in 2000, Gary Nicklaus came so close to winning on the PGA Tour. Gary was the fourth of Jack and Barbara Nicklaus's 5 children. He earned his PGA Tour card on his 8th attempt at the close of 1999, and he played full-time on the PGA Tour in 2000. Well, on this day, he found himself in a tie after 3 rounds of the Bell South Open with Phil Mickelson. Weather impacted the tournament, though. Heavy rain and thunderstorms caused the cancellation of the 4th round. but there needed to be a sudden death playoff to determine the winner. The playoff only lasted one hole. Mickelson hit a 9-iron to 18 feet on the par 3 16th and then rolled in his birdie putt to win the tournament. Gary felt like this was the start of something good on the tour and figured he'd break through for a win at some point. Unfortunately, this was as close as Gary would ever come to winning on the PGA Tour. He finished no higher than 25th the rest of the year. The closest he came to winning again was a 15th place finish at the 01 Memorial. After struggling in 2003, he put his pursuit of success on the PGA Tour on permanent hold and went back to the family business. On this day in 1972, New York Mets manager Gil Hodges died in Palm Beach, Florida. Hodges had just finished playing 27 holes of golf with Mets coaches Rube Walker, Joe Pignatano, and Eddie Yost, and they were walking back to their hotel when he suffered a heart attack and collapsed. He was pronounced dead at a local hospital 20 minutes later. Hodges was just 2 days shy of his 48th birthday, and the Mets were less than 2 weeks away from starting the baseball season. Yogi Berra was named Mets manager 4 days later. The team wore black armbands in tribute and remembrance of Hodges for the duration of the season. And we've already had one Billy Martin spring training story. How about another one? In 1982, Martin was managing the Oakland A's. Well, this time, Martin was not happy about there being no DH rule for spring training games at National League venues. So he sent pitcher Steve McCatty to the plate with a 15-inch long plastic toy bat as a protest. The home plate umpire that day was Jim Quick, who refused to let McCatty stand in with the prop. An argument ensued, but eventually McCatty stared at 3 strikes with a real bat on his shoulder. And as Mel Allen would say, how about that? And that leads us into this story, because on this day in 1977, This Week in Baseball premiered. I watched a lot of television when I was a kid, and one of my favorites on Saturday mornings was This Week in Baseball, hosted by New York Yankees announcer Mel Allen. Some of the younger generations may be tired of hearing how us Gen Xers only had 4 channels to watch growing up, and one of those was PBS, but this was one of the treats of the week, especially if you were a baseball-playing kid like me. This would be followed up by the NBC Game of the Week, and this is actually credited as being one of the influences on ESPN's SportsCenter, which started back in 1979. This Week in Baseball was a highlight show sponsored by Major League Baseball. Commissioner Bowie Kuhn saw that the NFL had NFL Films and was producing its own show, and he figured it would be a great way to promote the game. And it worked. The show would, of course, show highlights of games and big plays, great catches, big home runs, and wild antics. It would also zero in on players chasing records, have occasional interviews, and, of course, twib notes. And a lot of the great highlights would end with Allen's signature phrase, "How about that?" The show ran in syndication until 1998. It got picked up again by Fox in 2000 and ran until 2011 in varying forms before being shut down for good. Interesting tidbit, the opening theme song for the show was also used on a 1970s game show called Jackpot. Time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. And I'm bringing up Gen Xers again, but, us Gen Xers may think that we were the first to be able to carry around music in our pockets with the Sony Walkman. But the first truly portable music player predates those devices by about 6 decades. A pair of Hungarian brothers invented the Mickey phone in 1924. It was a small, portable record player that, when folded up in its case, could be carried around in a purse or a big pocket. It had a turntable, tone arm, and a small speaker, and played 10-inch 78 RPM records. About 180,000 of the units were actually manufactured between 1925 and 1927, before the novelty wore off. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.